If you ever thought being born into a wealthy family meant happiness, then let me tell you my story. I used to live in a 3-story mansion overlooking Crystal Lake in Vermont, where autumn looked like a painting and winter cut through your bones. But in that very house, I never felt warmth. I'm Riley Morgan, the second daughter of the famous Morgan family, founders of the luxurious Sterling Bay resort chain. I grew up surrounded by silk and marble, but discarded like an old coat shoved in the back of a closet. People thought I had everything. The truth was, I had nothing, except for silent dinners and fake hugs in front of cameras. From an early age, I understood my place in the family, behind Madison, my sister, 3 years older, always the pride of our parents. When Madison got a C in math, my mother immediately flew in a tutor from New York. And me? I brought home straight A's and got a distracted good job, her eyes never leaving the iPad. When she turned 16, Dad gifted her a brand new Audi. On my 16th birthday, I got an envelope with a $50 0-cent Starbucks gift card. It wasn't about the material things. What I craved was to be seen, to be loved, even just once, the way she was. Madison knew that, and she used it like a weapon. She once invited all our friends to a party at our house. Except she didn't tell me. Another time she stole my college essay and submitted it as her own, forcing me to rewrite it the night before the deadline. I went to Mom, hoping she'd protect me. She just shook her head. Madison is more sensitive than you. You need to be more understanding of your sister. And Dad? He didn't even pretend to care. He'd just wave off everything I said, like I was a troublemaker seeking attention. That's who they were. Glamorous in public, cold behind closed doors. The only person who ever really saw me, truly saw me, was my grandfather, Harold Morgan. But he's another part of this story. A story you've never heard, about a prestigious family that disowned the one daughter they couldn't control, and how I, Riley, turned the whole thing upside down. I wasn't raised by love from my parents. I was raised by a man with eyes silver like a winter sky and a gaze that saw through every lie. My grandfather, Harold Bennett, wasn't one for parties or award ceremonies. He didn't care about the trophies my family displayed in the living room to impress the press. But he looked at me as if I were something of real value. "Come here, Riley," he'd say, seated in a worn leather chair by the fireplace. "Tell me what brilliant things are filling that head of yours today." Not good girl like my mother called me, with poison-laced sweetness. Not troublesome like my father muttered with a sigh every time I spoke. But a mind full of brilliance. A simple phrase, but in a world built on empty words, it was the only thing I believed. Every Saturday afternoon, he'd take me out on his old wooden boat, named Lucille, after my grandmother. Out on the icy lake, he taught me how to read the wind, feel the tilt of the sail, and wait for the perfect moment to turn the rudder. "Life doesn't always go with the wind, Riley," he'd say, his grip firm on the rope. "But those who adjust their course win in the end." I etched that into my soul, not because it sounded wise, but because I knew he was talking about my life. On rainy days, instead of letting me wander the halls in silence, he'd take me to the city museum. Madison would throw a fit if asked to ditch her heels for boring art, but I walked beside him, eyes wide like a child seeing fireworks for the first time. We'd stand for hours in front of a single painting. "What do you see?" he'd ask. I said, "A lonely girl." He nodded. "And why do you think she's lonely?" No one else asked me questions like that. No one else cared to hear more than a single yes or no. But he did. He wanted me to think, to speak, to exist. When I turned 16, instead of throwing a lavish party like he did for Madison, he took me to New York to attend a shareholders meeting of the company he co-founded, Bennett and Lowell Capital. No one thought a teenage girl belonged in a room with 12 men in tailored suits, talking about preferred shares and strategic holdings. But he believed I should be there. And when I suddenly asked a question about the Northeastern market strategy, the whole room went silent. He chuckled, eyes glinting like a mischievous boy. Told you all, this kid has a sharper mind than half the board. Every time I came home, with my eyes burning with excitement, my mother would sneer. Let him stuff your head with nonsense again? And me? I said nothing. Because if I talked back, I'd be called disrespectful. But if I stayed quiet, I kept what he gave me. Knowledge, dignity, courage. Things no one else in that house ever wanted me to have. He wasn't perfect, but he was the first, maybe the only person who made me believe I wasn't invisible. And I swore, if they ever tried to touch the legacy he left me, I'd make them regret it every single minute. Harold died on a February morning, with snow still blanketing the roof of the Montpellier estate. I was with him in his final days, listening to every labored breath as it faded, like the end of a song. I read aloud to him, held his hand, as if I could keep him tethered to this world just a little longer. But he left anyway. Quiet. Proud, without a word of goodbye. His funeral was so extravagant it made me sick. My mother, Catherine Morgan, wore a designer black dress and dabbed her eyes with a Hermes handkerchief like she was starring in a drama. My father, David Morgan, stood nearby projecting the perfect sorrow, though he hadn't stepped foot in the hospital once during Grandpa's last 3 weeks. And Madison, she collapsed in front of the casket, right as the cameras began to roll. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because the pain had gone so deep, tears couldn't reach it. A week later, we gathered at the office of Attorney James Thornton in Burlington for the will reading. The room was sealed tight, not a breath of air slipped through. I sat beside Mr. Thornton while my parents and Madison sat across from us, confident, composed, as if they already knew what the will would say. But they knew nothing. Mr. Thornton opened the file, his voice steady. According to the official will signed on December 11th, all shares of Bennett and Lowell Capital, along with full ownership of the Morgan Hill estate and all related assets, are to be transferred to Miss Riley Morgan. I heard my mother's glass shatter in her hand. Madison looked like she'd been slapped. And my father? His face flushed red, his jaw clenched, and his fists tightened on his knees. No way, my mother hissed. There must be a mistake. There is no mistake, Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Thornton said evenly. Everything was signed by Mr. Harold in full mental capacity, with 2 independent witnesses. That girl, she manipulated him, Madison shouted. She hovered over him every day, buttered him up, and now she wants to take it all. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because my grandfather had already spoken for me by leaving me everything he built. After the reading, the atmosphere at home stretched taut, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Whispers followed me down every hall. Staff who once smiled at me now avoided my eyes. My parents, never warm to begin with, turned downright icy. No more sharp insults, just silence, cold, steel. One evening, I entered Grandpa's study to check important files. The room was empty. Documents gone, business records missing. When I confronted my father, he just shrugged. The lawyers need them to process the transition. But I knew they were planning something. And I started to feel afraid not because I wasn't strong enough, but because I began to understand. They didn't see me as their daughter. To them, I was an enemy, accidentally born under this roof. Everything started to shift just days after the will was read. No shouting, no threats. Just an eerie tension creeping through Morgan Hill. Silent, frigid, and deadly, like ice beneath melting snow. The library door, where I used to read with Grandpa, was suddenly locked. The office password changed without notice. Dinner? They no longer called me down. I had to eat alone, with a cold plate left on the counter, like scraps for a dog. I asked Mom, "What's going on?" She raised an eyebrow, eyes glued to her phone. "We're in mourning, Riley. Stop making everything about you." I scoffed. "I just want to get Grandpa's documents from his study." Dad stepped out from the shadows, voice low and slithering like a snake over stone. Those are assets under evaluation. No one is allowed to touch them. I couldn't sleep. The files were gone. My laptop had been rifled through. One morning I discovered Grandpa's personal safe had been cracked open. Empty. Called Mr. Thornton, but the phone just rang. No answer. Madison, who once slashed my blouse in high school and called it a laundry accident, was now pretending to be an angel. "Riley," she cooed, sugar in her voice but poison underneath. "You should get some rest. You're not looking well." I snapped, "Cut the fake concern, Madison. I'm not buying your performance." She tilted her head, smirk widening. "Well then, you better watch yourself. Keep talking about conspiracy, and people might think you've lost it." That evening, my parents summoned me to the dining room. No chandelier like usual, just harsh white lights that distorted every expression. Dad sat in the center like a judge. Mom stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes colder than a frozen lake. "We tried to keep things civil," he began, "but you keep pushing." I met his gaze. "I'm just honoring Grandpa Harold's wishes. No one here has the right to take what's not theirs." Mom sighed, her voice metal cold. "Riley, for everyone's sake you should leave. Temporarily." "Temporarily?" I laughed. "You're kicking me out." Madison entered from the doorway, my suitcase in hand, tossing it to the floor like a final blow. "More like giving you a chance to leave with dignity." I stood, heart pounding, blood roaring in my ears. "I'm not going anywhere." Dad said nothing. He raised a hand. 2 security guards entered, expressionless. They didn't push. Didn't grab. They just stood there, a living wall between me and what used to be home. I pulled my suitcase past Madison, who didn't even bother hiding her triumphant grin. At the door, Mom called out, "And don't take anything that belonged to him. Everything is part of the disputed estate." I turned back, eyes locked on hers. Everything except the truth. I shut the door behind me. Behind was family. Ahead, a world I'd never faced alone. But this time, I wouldn't back down. I left Morgan Hill with the single suitcase. Half clothes, half memories, I'd hidden from Mom and Madison. Rain poured down, so cold it numbed my fingers, but the coldest thing wasn't the rain. It was the truth. I'd just been thrown out by my own blood. My phone, part of the family plan, was disconnected within hours. My bank account, frozen, pending legal dispute, they claimed. Credit cards, all under Dad's name. I called Ashley, the only person I still trusted. When she opened the door to her small downtown Montpelier apartment and saw me, puffy-pied, shaking, suitcase torn from dragging through the rain, her face turned pale. "Oh my God, Riley, what happened to you?" "I have nowhere else to go." Ashley didn't ask. She just pulled me inside, handed me a blanket and a mug of hot cocoa. I'd once slept in silk sheets, drank tea from fine china. That night, I curled on a worn-out couch, holding a pillow, and cried like a child who'd just lost her mother. 3 days later, I filed a police report accusing my father of physical assault when he forced me out. At the station, the officer just shrugged. "Family matter, Miss Morgan. No witnesses, no visible injury. There's not much we can do." I clenched my fists. He yanked my hair and slammed my head into a wall. The officer looked at me like I was describing a soap opera. "Get a lawyer. It's a civil issue, not criminal." Civil issue. Another shield for the powerful. Ashley connected me with a probate attorney, Nathan Cole, her father's friend. After hearing the full story, he frowned. "They're playing dirty," claiming Harold was mentally unfit at the time of signing to nullify the will. "I can prove otherwise. I have his notes, his records, his... You have a safe place to keep them." I went silent. I used to. Now, I wasn't sure if anything was safe. For 3 weeks, I sent out job applications. Some replied with interviews, then suddenly canceled with no explanation. One HR rep leaned in and whispered, "Someone from Sterling Bay called, warned us about your mental state." I was nearly broke. I had to sell the watch Grandpa gave me on my 18th birthday, the last thing I had of him. Enough to cover 1 week of Ashley's rent. Then one night, while unpacking my suitcase, I found his old pocket watch. I'd never paid attention to it. Thought it was just a keepsake. But the back had a faint groove. I pressed it gently where a symbol was carved. A faint click. Inside, a hidden compartment holding a USB drive and a folded note. His handwriting still sharp and clear. If you're reading this, things have unfolded exactly as I expected. This is the rest of the truth. And your weapon. I held the USB in my hand. My fingers shook, not from fear, but from the first flicker of hope in days. I plugged it into Ashley's old laptop, heart thudding. Folder popped up, legacy_encrypted. Inside, dozens of files, financial documents, videos, scanned medical records. One folder labeled private, for Riley only. I opened the first video. Grandpa Harold's face appeared. Thinner, but eyes still burning bright. He sat in his study, mint tea in hand, voice raspy but sharp. Riley, if you're watching this, I may already be gone. And the people in that house have done just what I predicted. Don't be afraid. I've prepared for all of it. I was speechless. The screen continued showing clips of Grandpa speaking with his personal doctor via video, clearly time-stamped. The doctor stated unequivocally, "Mr. Harold is fully lucid. No signs of memory loss or mental decline." There was also a scanned document verifying this. The date of signature was 1 week before his death. I opened the private folder. Inside was a contact list. The first entry read, Richard Langston, independent executor, not related to the family, resides in Middlebury, has been instructed. I immediately called the number listed. A middle-aged male voice picked up. Richard speaking. This is Riley Morgan. I'm the granddaughter of Harold Bennett. Silence. Then, a quiet sigh. So you finally called. Your grandfather said you'd find your way eventually. I need help. They've taken everything. They're trying to overturn the will. Bring the USB to me tonight. Address is 22 Hillcrest Drive, Middlebury. We don't have time. Ashley drove me there that very night. When we arrived, Richard was already standing at the door, a silver-haired man with calm eyes as if he'd anticipated every turn of events. I told him everything. About being thrown out, the frozen assets, the will under attack. Richard remained thoughtful, then retrieved a metal box from a drawer. This was sent by your grandfather 3 months ago. I wasn't allowed to open it. Now it's yours. Inside was an emergency power of attorney. Full access to 2 offshore accounts in Riley Morgan's name, totaling $2,300,000, 0 cents USD. Attached was an audio recording between Harold and a second attorney, not Thornton, confirming that the will had been backed up and stored with an independent law firm. I could barely breathe. This wasn't just proof. It was money, power, and meticulous preparation for a long legal war. Richard poured me a glass of whiskey. Your grandfather said, they'll mistake Riley for being weak, but she's the silent storm they never saw coming. I gripped the glass. Then it's time the storm hits. Next day, I called attorney Nathan Cole. I have everything now, I said, voice sharper than ever. The original will, medical certification, recordings, hidden accounts, and a witness named Richard Langston. Nathan nodded, eyes lighting up as if handed an ace card. Then let's begin, Riley. We're going to pull off every mask, one by one. Our counterattack didn't start with a lawsuit, but with a closed-door strategy session in Richard's modest living room. Richard, Ashley, and attorney Nathan Cole. No boardroom table, no assistants taking notes. Just files, laptops, and fury held in every breath. We have 2 objectives, Nathan began, laying out a strategy map. Establish the irrefutable legality of the original will. 2. Expose the conspiracy by Catherine, David, and Madison to overturn it. I nodded, eyes fixed on the list of key players. Their names surfaced like old scars that never fully healed. Ashley chimed in, her usual softness replaced with steel. And the company? Riley's been locked out of all internal emails. The stock is dipping slightly, not critical yet, but if we hit their credibility hard, the board will start to crack. Richard pulled out a stack of documents. I have the names of board members. Harold secretly appointed last year to the ethics committee. They have veto power over structural and financial changes. I scanned the list. 3 names I recognized from following Grandpa to business conferences. Loyal people who once saw me as the rightful heir. So we can prove the opposition is not only unethical, but in violation of governance policy, Nathan emphasized. That's a lethal strike. And what if I told you, I said, lifting my gaze, I have one more ace. I placed a new recording on the table, a call from a former employee accusing my father of embezzling company funds to pay off a 6-figure debt for Madison. There's proof of the wire transfer, from the company account to an online betting site in Macau, I said, lips so cold I had to bite down to stop them from trembling. The room fell silent. Then Nathan said, Perfect, we don't need to convince anyone anymore. We'll make them accept the truth. For the next 3 days, we slept no more than 4 hours a night. Nathan drafted a lawsuit covering document forgery, will violation, asset misappropriation, and abuse of authority. Richard contacted each ethics committee member for private meetings to present the full evidence. I prepared my official statement and filed a motion to freeze all disputed assets before anyone in my family could move a dollar. Finally, I sent an email to the former family lawyer, Thornton, the one who betrayed my grandfather's trust. It read only, Be prepared to explain in court why you suppressed a valid will. No threats, no exaggeration. His truth, sharp as a scalpel. I used to believe that having enough evidence meant justice would arrive. Now I knew, justice doesn't walk in on its own. You drag it out of the powerful's grip, with grit and fury. And this time, I, Riley Morgan, wasn't just reclaiming what was mine. I was reclaiming the honor of the man who believed in me, till his final breath. The morning I stepped into the Windsor County Courthouse, light snow was falling. I wore a deep navy suit, vintage cut, passed down from my grandmother. My hair was neat. The small scar on my scalp from when my father yanked me out of the house was covered with powder, though I could still feel it like a silent brand. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to finish this. The courtroom was packed. On the plaintiff's side, me and attorney Nathan Cole. The defendants, my father, David Morgan, my mother, Catherine, and my sister Madison. Beside them sat 2 lawyers from Patterson and Lyle, expensive, cold, stone-faced. The judge was Eleanor Price, known for her zero-tolerance stance on deceit. She banged the gavel, voice firm. We are here to review the petition affirming the validity of Mr. Harold Bennett's will and to address charges of forgery, embezzlement, and ethical violations by the defendants. The opposition opened. They claimed Harold suffered cognitive decline in his final months. That Riley Morgan exploited that condition to manipulate the will in her favor. They submitted a handwritten letter supposedly from Harold, expressing regret and suspicion toward me. I looked at the letter and saw only forged sentiment by people who thought power could fake truth. Then it was our turn. Nathan called the first witness, Grandpa's private doctor. Mr. Harold was fully lucid, the doctor said, voice unwavering. I saw him 3 times a week. Memory, cognition, judgment, all intact. Next, Richard Langston, who confirmed Harold personally gave him the USB and critical documents, along with the original audio recording. Then came the video will, filmed 2 weeks before his death. As the screen lit up, I held my breath. My grandfather, though frail, stared directly into the lens. I, Harold Bennett, in full sound mind and of my own volition, declare that my granddaughter, Riley Morgan, is the sole heir to my estate and company. Not because I love her more than my children, but because I trust her integrity and capability. And if this will is ever challenged, Then I was right not to entrust it to the others. The courtroom fell completely silent. Nathan delivered the final blow. Handwriting analysis confirmed the fake letter was created 10 days after my grandfather's death. The computer used to draft it belonged to the office of Gregory Thornton, our former family lawyer. Judge Price flipped through the file, her eyes cold as steel. Based on irrefutable evidence, the court affirms that the will dated December 11 is valid, written while the testator was of sound mind and not under duress. Any assets seized unlawfully must be returned immediately. The court also orders an investigation into Gregory Thornton for forgery and professional misconduct. She paused, then added, "And I will be forwarding the entire case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution of the defendants." I didn't smile, I didn't cry. I simply lifted my head and looked directly at the three people who once called me family, now reduced to trembling shadows beneath the weight of justice. I didn't fall, but I didn't give up. And I won. 3 days after the verdict, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject: a chance to talk. From your parents. I didn't open it right away. I made a cup of tea, opened the window, sat down at my desk and read every line like watching an old play I already knew the ending to. "Riley, we made mistakes. Things went too far. You're still our daughter. Please meet with us just to listen. No lawyers, no blame, just family." I once begged to be called their daughter. Now with their reputations ruined and their bank accounts drained, they suddenly remembered who I was. How convenient. Agreed to meet. Not for reconciliation, but to look into the eyes of those who threw me out into the cold rain, who fabricated lies to steal both my inheritance and my name. We met at Nathan's office, a neutral ground, a place where no one could ever control me again. My father entered first, wrinkled suit, loose tie, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. My mother followed, less made up than usual, clutching a crumpled tissue. Madison arrived 5 minutes late, wearing sunglasses that covered half her face, as if hiding from the entire world. My father began, "Riley, I can't justify what I did. I was wrong. We were afraid of losing everything." I looked at him, my voice oddly calm. "And in that fear you chose to strip your own daughter of her rights?" My mother jumped in, voice trembling. "We were under pressure. The company's debts, the shareholders demanding answers. Everything collapsed around us. We panicked." I leaned back in my chair. "And in your panic you hired someone to forge Grandpa's signature, faked a farewell letter and dragged me out of my own home like a criminal." My mother began to cry, real tears. But they stirred nothing in me. Madison placed a small box on the table. These were Grandpa's, his silver cufflinks. I got them back from a pawn shop. I opened the lid. The only thing they hadn't ruined. "So what do you want?" asked, no emotion. My father glanced at my mother, then said, "We're hoping to keep a portion of the assets. Enough to live on. A small house, a yearly dividend. Just to get by." I gave a quiet laugh. "I was thrown onto the street. You spread rumors I was mentally unstable. You called every company I applied to blacklisting me. And now you're asking for money?" My mother stayed silent, her head lowered. I looked at each of them and spoke slowly. "I don't want to put anyone in jail, but I'm not saving anyone from the consequences they created. I won't take back the small apartment you're renting. I won't file more lawsuits. But I won't give you a single cent. There is no more family, no more trust. We are simply people who used to know each other." I stood, took the box of cufflinks and walked out of the room. Each step stripped away a chain of memory. I didn't look back. As the door clicked shut behind me, I realized I didn't need revenge. I already had the greatest victory. I was myself, unbound, no longer needing anyone's approval. I left Montpelier on an April morning, just as the snow had melted, making way for the scent of damp earth and fresh grass. There was no farewell, no one left to wave from the porch. Just me, light luggage, and a brand new belief that I had been given the chance to start over, this time the way Harold had always dreamed of. I didn't return to Morgan Hill Estate. Even though it now belonged to me, every stone and wall still carried the stench of deception. Instead, I sold it, a loud headline in the press, but I stayed silent. I used part of the proceeds to establish the Harold Bennett Foundation for Ethics and Leadership, headquartered in Burlington, where he once started his career with nothing but bare hands. The goal of the foundation wasn't to build a monument in his name, but to create opportunities for young people like I once was at 16. Smart, overlooked, and with no one on their side. The first scholarship went to a 17-year-old black girl who had once been homeless, and still scored a perfect grade in economics. When I looked into her eyes, prideful yet cautious, I saw myself. And I whispered silently to him, "I understand now, Grandpa. True legacy isn't built with buildings, but with the people we help stand." I also returned to Bennett and Lowell Capital, this time as chairwoman of the board, just as the will outlined. No one clapped when I entered that first board meeting, no red carpet. But when I laid out my restructuring plan focused on transparency and sustainability, I noticed a shift in some of their eyes. From doubt to acknowledgement. From acknowledgement to respect. I rehired Harold's former associates, those who had been forced into early retirement during my father's silent purge. They returned, bringing memories, experience, and the most important thing, loyalty to the ethical foundation my grandfather built. On my first night in my new Burlington apartment, a small space, white walls, windows, facing the lake, I opened my final suitcase and took out Grandpa's pocket watch. I placed it on the bookshelf, right next to the printed charter of the foundation. I no longer needed luxurious walls to feel valuable. I could hear him in every decision I made. I could feel him in every person I helped. His legacy wasn't just money. It was how he prepared me to face the world with my own strength. One late afternoon, I visited the cemetery, carrying a bouquet of white daisies and a small wooden plaque, etched with our secret naval signal, what we used to communicate during boat trips. I placed it beside his tombstone, which simply read, Harold Bennett, 1-9-4-5-2-2-3. Integrity above all. I stood there, wind blowing through my hair, my heart light. "I'm not that abandoned little girl anymore, Grandpa," I whispered. "I'm the one you trusted, and I'll live a life worthy of that trust." Riley Morgan's story is a powerful reminder that real legacy isn't money, it's character, ethics, and the ability to rise after betrayal. In real life, some grow up surrounded by wealth, yet starved for love and recognition. Riley didn't just reclaim her rights, she rebuilt herself, step by step, choice by choice. She teaches us that strength doesn't come from fame or family name, but from the courage to say, "I am worthy," and to live proving it every single day. What do you think of Riley's journey? Have you ever felt abandoned by your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more moving stories about family, betrayal, and resilience.